The first reading is from Ecclesiastes, chapter 1, verse 2, 12 and 14. Also chapter 2, verses 18 to 23. It's on page 1034 in your Pew Bible. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. I gotta take the book up. Wisdom is meaningless. I, the teacher, was king over Israel and Jerusalem. I devoted myself to study and to explore the wisdom, all that is done under heaven. What a heavy burden God has laid on men. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing of the wind. What a twisted, let's see, is that it? Yeah. What is twisted cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. And then we'll go to chapter 2, verses 18 to 23. I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one that comes after me. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool. Yet he will have control over all the work into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. So my heart began to despair over my toilsome labor under the sun. For a man may do the work with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then he must leave it all he owns to someone who has not worked for it. This too is meaningless and a great misfortune. Then second reading is from Colossians, chapter 3, verses 1 to 11, on page 1834 in your Pew Bible. This is the rules for holy living. Since then you have been raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. If you died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to you, your earthly nature, sexual immorality, impurity, hate, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. Because of this, the wrath of God is coming. You used to walk in these ways. In life, you once lived. But now you must not yourselves of all such things, rid yourself of all such things, as these are such things are anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with the practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge, in the image of the Creator. Here there is no Greek, no Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian or Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with the compassion, kindness, humility, and I went beyond what I should be reading. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Thank you, Kathy. So everybody, please stand as you are able for our gospel acclamation. Seek ye first. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Our gospel reading this morning comes to us from the Gospel of Luke chapter 12. Glory to you, O Lord. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide inheritance with me." And Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me to be judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all things of greed. A man's life does not consist of the abundance of his possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced good crop. And he thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." And then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I'll store all my grain and my goods, and I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich toward God." This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. And please be seated. A few years ago, there were 17 of us from the church I was at. We were all crammed into this small bus on our final leg of this 36-hour journey that began in the Twin Cities and was to end in Iringa, Tanzania. The bus was built to hold 17 people, but not necessarily 17 people with enough luggage and people with luggage enough to last them the next couple of weeks. And so after 2 days, 3 airplanes and 5 airports, we finally spent the night in Dar es Salaam. And in our new environment, we were brutally tired, and we slept like logs for about 7 short hours before beginning our 11-hour bus journey westward towards Iringa. And that next morning, we were on the road, and we were on the road on one of Tanzania's best cared for roads, which was adequately rough at best. And we were all running on adrenaline in anticipation of what lay ahead of us as we prepared for over a year to meet up with and experience life together with our Tanzanian brothers and sisters. And along the road, we came upon a portion of the road that was Mikumi National Park. It went right through the park. And okay, some along the road, we had to slow down, and maybe more than a few times for giraffes and elephants and baboons.
And our exhaustion seemed to dissipate for a short while as we thought to ourselves, what a glorious welcome to Tanzania. I mean, how often do we get to see this? And on our first day. And we kept on going, and we were about 40 to 50 miles east of Tanzania, and about 10 hours now on the road that day, and many of us were falling in and out of consciousness and tired and exhausted and desperate for any opportunity we could get to put ourselves into a horizontal position. But that was about to change. The sun had set a couple of hours earlier, so as we glanced out our windows into the moments of moments of brief consciousness, all we could make out was an occasional flickering lights of small fires that were burning alongside the roadside, and people were selling charcoal and burning small fires to keep warm, to take the chill off the evening. And then we felt the bus come to a halt. And looking through the glaze, the haze of our tired eyes, we noticed a group of about a dozen people alongside the edge of the road, dancing and cheering in front of the headlights of their parked vehicle on the side of the road. And we soon found out that this group of strangers were actually none other than a group of our Tanzania brothers and sisters from Iringa. They had been waiting there for 2 hours alongside the road, making the trip out of the city about an hour's worth of drive to greet us and escort us into town to our final destination. And so the rest of our way into town, we had all but forgotten about our exhaustion as we were kept awake by half of our roadside friends who decided to join us in our already crammed bus the remainder of the trip. And so the cramped quarters didn't matter much anymore. We were all thrilled and energized by the welcome we had just received, unaware of what was yet to come that night. And as we pulled into our new home, our home for the next couple of weeks, it was about 11:30 at night, and as we drove up to the church, our bus was surrounded by another 40 to 50 of our new friends waiting to give us this proper Tanzanian welcome. And getting off the bus, we were greeted as if we were lifelong friends, with boisterous song and dance and clapping and hugging and those infamous and contagious Tanzanian smiles. And so for the next hour and a half, we were treated with the warmest hospitality and the most energetic song and dance that any of us could ever have imagined. We felt like we were treated like royalty. We were blown away. Can you imagine an experience like that happening between strangers right here in Painesville or New London or West Central Minnesota? Or really anywhere in the United States for that matter? Not many come to mind, at least, and this image may seem to be a bit odd to us in our culture, but from what I learned, such experiences aren't necessarily particularly unusual in Tanzania. I imagine that's partly because of a couple of things. First of all, in Tanzania, many people are aware of the dangers that travelers may face along the journey, even in the day-to-day life. And second, they know that when they journey across a long stretch of bush or wherever they might go, they will face the same vulnerabilities and will be just as dependent upon the generosity of others along the way. You see, they understand that we are all interconnected, that we all need one another, that we have a responsibility for and to one another. Our friends in Tanzania taught us about the importance of community. This experience changed my direction of what was important in ministry and in life. It changed my perception of the church, and more importantly, it changed my life. That trip and my whole perception of what it means to be in community with one another completely changed. For this faith thing, this church thing, it's about relationship. It's about community with each other and with our God. Now, this works as a good image as we read the stories. We heard the story from the Gospel of Luke. And the story is about a rich man being foolish by storing up all of his grain. And I initially think that Jesus is talking about money. That what we should get out of this parable is that we should be sharing our money and our resources and not hoarding it for ourselves, which in fact is really not a bad way to go with this text. However, what I see in this parable is not just about money. It's not just about wealth or about the need to give to the church. These are good things for us to talk about. However, ultimately, I think this parable is also directed towards this man's isolation. I mean, think about it for a moment. Think about that story. Think about the conversation this man is having with himself. It's all about him. This man is faced with the blessing of this abundant harvest, and all he can think of is what he should do to make sure that he gets the most out of it, so that he can live comfortably into old age. Complete narcissism, right? And more than narcissism, the farmer falls prey to the notion that he himself can secure his own future. That he doesn't need anyone. That he doesn't depend on anyone. That he can go it alone, and which is why Jesus calls him foolish, because at the end, not only is he not only immune to death, but he will die alone, and all that he has stored up for will not help him, and it won't go to others who can put it to good use. But instead, it will all turn to dust in the wind. Narcissism and isolation can lead him, and it can lead us to believe that we are the only ones who matter. And then what about the last line of this parable? Jesus said, "So it will be with those who store up treasures for themselves and are not rich toward God." How can we, as individuals and as a community, be rich toward God without also, and really first of all, being rich towards others? Martin Luther said that God needs neither our good works nor our wealth, but our neighbor does. God needs neither our good works nor our wealth, but our neighbor does. So maybe this parable is really about community. The community in which we find nourishment and comfort and help and grace and love and hope, and the community in which and through which we experience life with God. This community that includes Nordland and all of our neighbors, but also stretches far beyond these walls in this community to the far reaches of the planet. And this can impact the way that we see one another, the way we see our enemies, the way we see the gifts of money and possessions that God has gifted to us. It can also shape how we pay attention to each other in ways to making sure that no one is in isolation, that no one is led to believe they are alone, even. This is tough for us today, after hearing the news overnight, that no one is led to believe they can shoot up a mall. isolation, both individually and corporately, as communities and as a nation and as a world community where we think that we're only ones that matter, can lead to evil rearing its ugly head. So we've got to pay attention to one another. We've got to take care of each other. People of God, may we be reminded of this in our lives, of not only what we do with our gifts of money and our possessions that are ultimately gifts from God to be shared with us for the sake of the world, but also may we be reminded that God gave us to each other and to our neighbors and to our community and even those across the world, that we are created not for the sake of our own selves, but for the sake of each other, and that we are all in this together. My friends, may this be a message that is both challenging to us, but also good news for us. Thanks be to God. Amen. God bless you as you go out these doors to serve the world that God so loves. Go in peace and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.